Good morning. Looks like we have a couple more people joining, so we're going to give them a couple more minutes. I'd love to see all your guys' faces, although it's just pictures. Okay, I am going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. I am Lori Cottingham. I'm your compliance manager. And today we're just going to go over some real estate forms, common questions, common errors that I see. And we will go ahead and get started. And I'm going to try and share my screen here. So give me 1 second. And it should be opening soon. Somebody can give me a heads up on when that is.
You're good.
Awesome. Okay, we already went to that slide, so we can go to the next one. So again, with any real estate transaction, we always start out with agency. And I just wanted to bring this to everyone's attention because it seems to be a little bit of confusion on when you're working with a buyer and they want to purchase a for sale by owner, or you have somebody call you up and they want you to facilitate the transaction. Both of these things are considered substantive, so we need to make sure that you're getting agency relationships disclosed to both buyer and seller in these situations. So please don't forget that. It's very important. It's commerce law, and you don't want to be on the bad side of commerce. So just remember that. I also want to talk to you a little bit about the facilitator. And this is also on the agency form. And just want to make a statement. Because of the NAR settlement, we have to have some sort of contract with a buyer when we are showing them a property. Some of you have in North Star the touring agreement. Some of you do not. And so some have to rely on either a buyer representation contract or a facilitator agreement. I caution all of you, if you're showing one of your listings or one of our company listings, not to fill out a facilitator agreement. And the reason why is because it's against the law. And also, if you read, and I've got this highlighted, you guys probably can't even read it, but if you can, great. Basically, in the event a facilitating broker or a salesperson working with a buyer shows a property listed by the facilitating broker's company, the facilitating broker must act as the seller's broker. And it also is in reverse if you are working with the seller and you have a facilitator agreement with that seller, and then all of a sudden you have a buyer come in. You don't want to do a buyer agreement, and you could do a facilitator agreement. But again, remember that in real estate, you can only be one. You can only represent one unless it's dual. And dual would mean that you have a representation with the buyer and the seller, and they have to agree to that dual agency. Hope that makes sense. And please ask questions as I'm going along because I can talk forever on this stuff. The next thing I want to bring up is the earnest money receipt. An earnest money receipt is used when you are receiving a check, cash, money order. If you're using trust funds, do not use an earnest money receipt. And I've underlined it in red on why. And it says that you have money, the earnest money, in your possession. So if for some reason a buyer decides not to submit or accept your trust funds, and we have a receipt that says you've had the money, Commerce is going to look pretty poorly on that. And I think fines for earnest money fraudulently, I think is around $3,000. So that is not a good one to do. So again, a receipt is when you receive something from somebody, you give them a receipt. Or if you purchase something from somebody, they give you a receipt. You're not getting anything in the regards to earnest money if you're using trust funds. So this form should not be used. All right, listing agreements. Minnesota Department of Commerce requires 11 statements on every single listing agreement. They are all included on our MAR forms, so you don't have to worry about them. The ones I've highlighted are ones that you have to fill in, and they are a definite expiration date, a description of the real property, whether it be legal or an address, the list price and any terms required by the seller. So for example, if they'll only accept cash or conventional, however that works. And then the amount of compensation or commission or a basis for computing that commission. So you can't have a range because again, you can't compute a range that's going to give a definite compensation amount. The other ones are all on there. A clear statement on what you're going to do to receive that compensation, how you can cancel it, an override clause, which is, giving that protective list in 72 hours within 72 hours after the expiration, a notice that the compensation is determined by each broker with their client. So that's an antitrust part of the agreement. Dual agency notice, a notice on who and how closings are going to be arranged. And then a statement that says after the expiration, if you list with another broker, you are no longer obligated to pay a commission. So again, all of these things are on our Minnesota forms, which is why I strongly recommend that every time you use one of our forms, you make sure that it is the most up-to-date form. Because remember, the forms change either because of a change in the law or a lawsuit. And we want to make sure that we're using the most current forms so that we're not only protecting our clients, but we're also protecting us as agents and our company. Okay, moving along. On the listing agreement, this is all that new fun stuff because of the NAR settlement. And a lot of you guys have been doing great on this, but some of you are still a little bit confused. So I wanted to go over it again. On line 119 is where you put the compensation that you are expecting the seller to pay our company. On lines 122 to say 124, this is talking about if the seller is going to be paying the buyer broker direct, which also reflects in the purchase agreement on line 406. And I'll get to that a little bit later when I'm talking about purchase agreements. But if you put something in either lines 123, a dollar amount, or 124, which is a percentage, that is reducing the amount you have on 119. So if you're expecting 3% for you, and you have 3% on line 124, that reduces what our company is going to get to 3%. So think of it that way, because if you put 3% on line 119, and you also put 3% on line 124, you've just worked for free. And we don't want that, because not only do you need the money, the company needs the money too. So, and also, in that regard, if you or the seller, and actually these are the seller's decisions on how you explain this, if the seller prefers that you share your compensation, Then you would use the next lines on the next page, which are 129 to 134. And what that is saying is that we shall or shall not offer compensation. And again, that's a crucial line, because if you're not, and you don't have anything in 124, then whatever we get on 119 is what we get. We're not splitting it with anyone. With the cooperating broker compensation agreement, we always are going to be using a cooperating broker compensation agreement with the other company. On in-house deals, we do not need to use a cooperating broker compensation agreement because we're not cooperating with another broker. We're cooperating with one of our own, so we don't need that. And again, that split is determined, again, by this listing contract, but that's a whole other subject, and we're not going to run down that road today. So you can't have both 124 and lines 131 and 133 filled in with amounts. And the reason that is if a purchase agreement comes in and line 406 is filled with a percentage, if you read further down, and again, I'll get to that page in just a little bit, but it says that it is in addition to any cooperating compensation. The other thing I want to mention is that if your listing is offering cooperating compensation, please make sure that you let any buyer agent know that that is how they're going to be paid. And if they write it compensation in on the purchase agreement on line 406, you're going to be countering that with a 0 and then offering them a cooperating broker compensation agreement. I've heard many horror stories about agents saying, well, our company doesn't do this. My comment to them would be, well, then I guess you're getting paid by your buyer, because that's how we have it on our listing contract. The other thing I want to mention about this is if you do opt to do the line 124, the only time that you can say to a buyer's agent, just put it in the offer, is if you have that seller's permission. There is another addendum, and it's called Addendum to Listing Contract Seller Concessions, which has a portion on that addendum that will allow you to present that to the seller to say, can I have permission to say, if your buyer agent is looking for, compensation from our seller to pay your fee, we are allowed to say that. Otherwise, we're not. So be very, very careful on how you are addressing buyer agents when they call you, if you have the direct to broker compensation. There is one other way that we can fill this out, and that's just simply having something on line 119 and leaving the rest blank and see what comes in on an offer. Again, it's kind of risky, but it also might help your seller in the fact that you're not spilling the beans on how much they're willing to compensate a buyer's agent. So again, that's kind of a maybe a negotiating feature that you might use or not. I do know that cooperation or cooperating compensation is probably going to be going bye-bye, and we probably won't have to deal with it, and our listing contracts will be a lot smoother. I don't know that for a fact, but I've heard little birdies talking about it, so I'm thinking it might happen. Okay, moving on. So the buyer representation agreement. There are 8 requirements that need to be on a buyer rep contract. And the most important thing is that it must be in writing. And again, all of these things are on our Minnesota forms. The only thing that we pretty much need to fill in is the compensation, and I didn't finish highlighting these. A definite expiration date, the compensation, and then again, we need to clearly explain what services we're providing to earn that commission, a clear statement on how to cancel it, an override clause with, again, a protective list of the properties that you've shown them. A notice that commission is negotiable and that it's determined between the broker and the buyer, a dual agency notice, and then stating that after the expiration of the agreement, if, oops, it's not supposed to be the seller, it's the buyer. Whoopsie, let me go back. That the buyer, if they sign another buyer agreement with another brokerage, they do not own any compensation. So it's a misspell on my part. So that is the buyer rep. So one thing I want to talk about with the buyer rep agreement is the compensation that we go in there. So many times I see that the shall or shall not be reduce that obligation is not checked. This is extremely important because when you get to writing up a contract, you have to know, and we have to have it in writing, if we don't get anything from that seller, if the buyer is still going to be paying us or not. And so if you don't have that filled in, it's kind of important. The other thing I want to stress too is if you are charging an admin fee, please, please, please make sure this is on your buyer rep contract. If it just goes on the disclosure, the compensation disclosure for the buyer, that's just a disclosure. That does not obligate that buyer to pay us that because, again, it's not on the contract. So we want to make sure that those are on the contract. And again, here's the compensation disclosure, just a little snippet of it. Please make sure you're presenting these before they sign the purchase agreement. It says it right on the form that they're acknowledging that they have received this notice prior to signing a purchase agreement for a property. So make sure that you're doing that beforehand. And don't forget to put on that admin fee because, again, that is something that you need to disclose to them. But it isn't a contract, so you have to also have it on your buyer rep contract. And should we use the seller concession? Oh, let me go back to the chat because I didn't quite read that. This is from Leanne. Should we use the seller concession addendum when the buyer broker compensation is negotiable? Can we have them sign that form without putting an amount in there? Yes, you can use that if you look at the form, and I have it on my other screen because I knew people would ask me questions about it. It does, you can just say that the seller shall or shall not, or the seller authorizes or does not authorize broker to disclose seller's willingness to offer concessions. So you would not have to have compensation on there. Correct. Good question. Thanks for asking. Okay. So I think we have that one all figured out. On the purchase agreement, dates are extremely, extremely important. Please make sure that you are putting dates where they need to go and make sure that when your clients are signing, that they are dating. And when you're using AuthentiSign, it's really easy to put that date so that it puts the date they actually sign. And again, they're important because if you're in a court of law or if you're in an ethics hearing, people look at the dates. Commerce will look at the dates. And we don't want to mess with any of those. So please make sure you do that. One of the other most common things I see on purchase agreements is in regards to the mortgage financing contingency. If you are checking line 70, which is in regards to the buyer's financing, and checking either refund to buyer or forfeited to seller, you do not use anything between line 77 and 112. That's because line 76 says or. So basically there's two options here. There's a lot of times where I'll see line 70 checked and I'll see line 73 checked. And then we go to the next page and we see lines 108 and 112 checked. So again, all of this is specified in regards to the written statement that you're going to try to get from the loan officer by this date to prove that that buyer can purchase the property and is free, he's clear to close. Which brings me to talk about the written statement. A written statement is not a pre-approval letter. It is a statement that you get from the lender as you would a pre-approval letter, but it is basically stating the buyer is clear to close. Everything's done. There's no more what ifs. So again, that is what that written statement is. And it is one of your fiduciary duties to make sure that you get this written statement by the date that's on line 78. So if you get an offer and you're the listing agent, make sure that you're bugging that buyer's agent to get that statement. Because I've actually been in an ethics hearing where this was a cause for a seller to cancel, and he had the right to cancel the purchase agreement. So again, we have to make sure that we do that for our sellers. I put on here the agency notice. If you've come to this point of the purchase agreement and you don't know who you represent, you've gone too far. We should always know who we're representing in the transaction. So again, it depends on what kind of contract you have with that client. If you're representing the seller or the buyer, if you are representing the seller and one of the other agents is in our office is representing the buyer, it's not individual, it's dual agency. And then the facilitator is when you have that facilitator agreement. You can't have, if you're representing the seller and you write up a contract with the buyer, you can't be a facilitator because you owe all your fiduciary duties to that seller. And again, I talked about that earlier when I was talking about the facilitators and the agency disclosure. So please remember that. Okay, this section up here is all about the seller paying direct to the broker. And again, if there's a number in here and we have cooperating compensation on our listing agreement, we want to make sure this is 0 because as you see that I have highlighted, this amount is in addition to listing broker's offer of cooperating compensation, if any. So you might have, let's say you have a listing agreement and you're offering cooperating compensation at 3%. Or let me change that. Let's say you're offering cooperating compensation at 2.5. And a buyer agent has a buyer rep contract that's for 3. You could, if you're the buyer's agent, know that you're getting that 2.5 and put 0.5%. So that brings that back up to that buyer rep agreement. And that is one of the reasons why they have the contract written this way, is for these things, and also for paying direct to the buyer's broker. So hopefully that's clear as mud. The other thing I see a lot of is having people sign the dual agency when it does not exist. Whoops, I can't click that. Remember, if you are not in a dual agency situation, you do not want your client signing or agreeing to dual agency because they're signing something that doesn't exist. Which is why on line 413, the last sentence says, do not complete lines 414 to 430. If dual agency does apply, then you're going to be completing those lines. So please make sure that you have, it's really easy if you're doing an AGENT21 to go ahead and delete these signature blocks before you send them. And on that note, please make sure that when you're sending out any type of contract, whether it be a listing agreement, purchase agreement, buyer rep agreement, through AGENT21, that you are going over this document with that client. This is part of Article 9 of our Code of Ethics. We have to give them copies and we have to explain everything that they're signing. So again, if you're going through this, you would see that, oh my gosh, I forgot to remove that dual agency signing block. I have to get rid of that before I send it. It's easy then to take care of that. The date of the purchase agreement. And this gets kind of confusing when people are doing addendums or amendments to the purchase agreement. Some agents will put the final acceptance date as the date of the purchase agreement. This is incorrect. And this is why dates are so important. The date of the purchase agreement is defined as line 1 of the purchase agreement. So the date that you write up this purchase agreement, even though it might be accepted a month from now, it's still the date of the purchase agreement. So make sure that you are making note of that. I also see a lot of missing final acceptance dates. The final acceptance date is very important because it hinges on a lot of things. When the earnest money needs to be deposited, when your inspection negotiations start and end, a lot of things. So please remember to do that. And when you're using a counter offer addendum, put the counter or the final acceptance date on line 29 of that form. That is why it was added there, so that it's consistent that you would put it there, because that would be different than probably some of the signatures on page 12, which is where the final acceptance date lives on the regular purchase agreement. Okay. Remember when you have a CIC that you have a 10-day right of rescission. This is Minnesota statute. I think it's 515 something something. I don't remember off the top of my head, and I could be wrong on those numbers, so don't quote me on it. But again, the 10-day right of rescission is extremely important, and you should not be putting properties that are within that 10-day right as pending, because that is not representing your seller. Because again, a buyer could be looking at something and they find out, oh my gosh, I can't have, my kitty cat here, so I guess I can't purchase this property, which is one of the reasons why they have that 10-day right of rescission, so they can read all of the forms. Also, please make sure you're using a receipt, because that helps us gauge when that 10-day right of rescission starts. Some people get these documents before they even write an offer. So if you have that receipt, that's going to cut down that 10-day right of rescission. There is also a waiver, but you have to give them at least 3 days. And that is statute. So that 3 days cannot be waived. The other thing I want to mention when doing all of these forms is just slow down, breathe, give yourself time to explain things to the consumers, because they don't know. And a lot of times we take it for granted because we know that they know, but they probably don't. So make sure that you're giving them time to ask questions and explain things thoroughly. And I'm at the end of my slides, so if anybody has questions, I am open to comment because I ran through that pretty quick. Doesn't look like we have anything.
And if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. I can take you off mute. We can discuss anything while we have Lori here. Oh, I see a chat. Oh, thank you, Lori. Great job. Okay, Kelly, let's, Kelly, 1 second. I'll unmute you here.
Hi, guys. I think probably the most talked about question in our office right now would be presenting the new compensation rules to sellers in the listing contract.
Yep.
Has anybody found a good way to explain that simply, or are people getting pushback at all? I think that's kind of the most talked about thing in our office right now. What are your thoughts, Lori?
Again, I think I personally have never done this because I don't work with buyers and sellers right now. But I think how I would explain it would be, you know, after you've established what that compensation is that they are going to be paying, or maybe even before, because it might hinge on what you put on line 119, is basically stating that, you know, within the last year, there was an NAR settlement, and it kind of changed how we pay buyer brokers. And so we've changed the form to let you decide how you would like to do that. You can either pay me and I can pay the buyer broker, or you can pay me and then we can reduce that and you can pay the buyer broker direct at the closing, depending on what is written in the purchase agreement. Or we could just, you can pay me and we can see what happens. Those are basically your options. Whatever you feel comfortable with is how we can proceed. And if they are still confused, which they probably will be, they might ask you, well, how do you think we should do it? And then again, that's going to be on what your comfort level is, what you've seen in your marketplace, on what kind of offers you're getting. Again, I would never tell a buyer's agent, if you have cooperating compensation, to go ahead and do whatever, because again, your contract states you're paying cooperating compensation. Because that just gets muddy, and then you have to change either the purchase agreement again or the listing contract. And you want to make sure that your listing contracts and your buyer contracts don't get muddled too much, because again, that confuses the client. And confused clients can get angry and can bring you to court. So that's how I would do it.
Thank you, Lori. Bob shared with us that NAR has some good information on that subject as well.
Yes, NAR has a ton of information. If you have not been to their site lately, I would definitely go there, nar.realtor. A lot of really good information, updates on other pending lawsuits, stuff like that. So it's a really good resource for everyone. And I'm going to,
I don't see any other questions or anybody else raising their hand. So that must mean you did a fantastic job, Lori. Thank you so much for sharing that. And for everyone on the call today, this will be available to watch. I send an email out each week where you can watch the latest episode, or you can head over, subscribe to our YouTube channel at C21 Atwood, where all of the Agent 21s are recorded. You can click and watch at your own leisure at any time. You'll notice that we have a playlist titled Agent 21, where all Agent 21 recordings are housed, so that you can grab any of this information at a moment's notice and review. So this one will probably be the most watched. Lori, thank you so much for providing us with this great information. And as always, we love helping our agents, especially if they have questions. We would love to take any time to help you through any single form, any question that you have as you're writing purchase agreements, as you're writing listing agreements, as you're submitting paperwork. We are right here for you. You don't have to send it over and then just cross your fingers for a few days and hope that it's okay and that we don't get an email back. Feel free to reach out, call. We love, love, love training on this. I cannot stress as much how much we love to help our agents and train them on all of these questions so that you feel confident in what you're presenting out to your clients, both buyers and sellers alike. So we want to make sure that we're protecting you, providing this valuable resource to you as a Century 21 Atwood agent, and to have the best of the best right here with us as our compliance director that knows these laws inside and out and looks at these contracts hundreds of times a day. Best to be safe than sorry, I always say. So reach out. We're your resource. We love helping. There are many of us here. Any office admin, Lori herself, myself, just reach out. We'll get you in touch with the right person.
And again, I would much rather have you call me before and then not have to have you redo a lot of paperwork, and which I know that you guys don't like to do either. So please feel free to give me a call. I'm here to help.
Thank you so much. Fantastic job. Make it a great week. We'll see you all next week at Agent 21. Make sure to register. It was also in the link that was emailed out today. Have a great one. We'll talk to you guys soon.